A boy, just 11 years old, was kidnapped and held captive by a man no one suspected. For 27 years, he lived in a dark basement, chained alone and tortured. He thought he'd die there alone in the dark. But then one day, a door opened and his life changed forever. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What do you think about this story? Now let's begin. Run, damn it, run! Ethan's voice cracked through the chilly October air, sharp and desperate, as he shoved Noah hard enough to send him stumbling into the tall grass. The quiet of St. Joseph, Minnesota, shattered like glass under a hammer. It was October 22nd, 1989, and the sun had dipped low, painting the cornfields in hues of gold and shadow. 11-year-old Ethan Callahan, his younger brother Noah, and their friend Cody pedaled down the familiar country road, their bikes rattling over gravel, laughter bouncing between them. They'd convinced Patty, their mom, to let them ride to the convenience store for a movie, a rare treat for a Sunday night. The air was crisp, not too cold, but the kind that nipped at your fingertips. The boys didn't notice the eerie whistle of wind through the corn stalks, didn't sense the weight of something sinister creeping closer like a storm cloud, swallowing the last light of day. Ethan, always the leader, rode a little ahead, his blue jacket flapping as he called back to the others. "Bet I can beat you both to the store." Noah, a year younger, pedaled furiously to keep up while Cody, lanky and cautious, trailed behind, clutching his flashlight. The road was empty, save for the occasional hum of a distant car, the world around them sinking into the stillness of a rural evening. None of them could have known that someone was watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In a house 25 minutes away, Patty and Mark Callahan sat at a friend's dinner table, plates of roast chicken and mashed potatoes half-eaten, the clink of glasses mingling with soft laughter. The phone rang sharp and jarring, cutting through the warmth of the evening. Patty's friend waved her over her face, tight with something unspoken. "Patty, it's for you. It's Noah." Patty's heart skipped a mother's instinct kicking in before her mind could catch up. She crossed the room, her steps quickening as she grabbed the receiver. "Noah. What's wrong, Mom?" Noah's voice was a broken sob, barely audible over the static. "Somebody took Ethan." The room spun. Patty's knees buckled and she gripped the table to steady herself. Mark was at her side in an instant, his face pale as he grabbed the keys. "We gotta go," he said, his voice low, urgent. The drive back was a blur, headlights slicing through the dark, the endless fields blurring past each mile, stretching their panic thinner. Patty's mind raced with images of Ethan's grin, his messy blonde hair, his voice calling out for one more bedtime story. He's fine. He has to be fine. But the dread in her gut told her otherwise. Back on the road, the night had turned predatory. The boys had just left the store, a VHS tape tucked in Ethan's backpack, when a shadow stepped out from the cornfield. A man's face hidden behind a black ski mask, his eyes glinting in the dim glow of their flashlights. The gun in his hand was no toy. It was heavy reel, its barrel catching the moonlight. "Get off your bikes," he growled, his voice low and jagged like gravel underfoot. "Now!" The boys froze, their breath visible in the cold air. Noah's eyes darted to Ethan, waiting for his big brother to know what to do. Cody's flashlight trembled in his grip, the beam shaking across the man's boots. Ethan's heart pounded, but his mind was sharp, calculating. He'd read enough Hardy Boys books to know they were in deep trouble, but he wasn't about to let this guy hurt his brother or his friend. "Hey, Mr. Ethan," said his voice steadier than he felt. "We don't got any money. Just let us go home." He took a small step forward, hands raised, trying to draw the man's attention. "Shut up," the man snapped, swinging the gun toward Ethan. "Down in the grass, all of you. Flashlights off." Noah's lip quivered, but he didn't move. Cody clutched his bike's handlebars, his knuckles white. Ethan's mind raced. "He's only one guy. We're three. We can do something." "Noah, Cody," he whispered, barely moving his lips. "When I say you run, Don't look back." The man took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. I said, "Down." His voice was a snarl now, the gun waving between them. Ethan's eyes flicked to the ditch beside the road, deep dark, a chance to hide. He had to act fast. "Now," Ethan shouted, lunging forward, not at the man, but toward the side, swinging his flashlight like a club. The beam caught the man in the face, and for a split second he flinched, cursing as he shielded his eyes. Ethan's heart thundered, his legs burning with adrenaline. "Run, damn it, run!" he yelled again, shoving Noah toward the ditch. Cody stumbled but caught himself sprinting after Noah, their bikes crashing to the ground. The man roared, swinging the gun back toward Ethan. "You little—" He grabbed for Ethan's jacket, but Ethan twisted, kicking at the man's shin. His sneaker connected, and the man grunted, staggering just enough for Noah and Cody to vanish into the tall grass, their footsteps fading into the night. Ethan turned to run, his legs pumping, but the man was faster. A rough hand clamped onto his shoulder, yanking him back. "You're mine," the man hissed, dragging Ethan toward the cornfield. "Let me go!" Ethan screamed, his voice raw, echoing into the darkness. "Noah, Cody, keep running!" He thrashed, clawing at the man's arm, but the grip was iron. The last thing he saw was the flicker of his friends' flashlights disappearing, the sound of their panicked breaths swallowed by the wind. Patty and Mark screeched into their driveway, the house lit up by flashing police lights. Noah and Cody were huddled on the porch, wrapped in blankets, their faces pale and streaked with tears. A deputy stood over them, scribbling in a notepad, his radio crackling. Patty ran to Noah, pulling him into her arms. "Where's Ethan?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Where's my boy?" Noah's words came out in gasps. "He told us to run. He tried to stop him. The guy had a gun, Mom. He took Ethan." Cody nodded, his eyes wide, biting his nails so hard his fingers bled. "We heard him yelling. He kept telling us to go." Mark's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight as he turned to the deputy. "What are you doing to find my son?" His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a man holding back a scream. "We've got units combing the area," the deputy said, his tone calm but strained. "Dogs, choppers, volunteers. We're doing everything we can." Everything wasn't enough. Patty's mind spiraled, picturing Ethan alone, scared somewhere in the dark. She clutched Noah tighter, as if holding him could keep the world from crumbling. The neighbors gathered, their faces grim, offering coffee and prayers, but the air was thick with fear. St. Joseph, a town where kids played in the streets and doors stayed unlocked, was no longer safe. The peace they'd taken for granted had been ripped away, leaving a wound that would fester for years. The search began before dawn. Flashlights bobbed across fields, dogs barked their noses low to the ground, and helicopters thrummed overhead, their spotlights cutting through the fog. Volunteers in orange vests tramped through cornfields, calling Ethan's name until their voices grew hoarse. The police set up roadblocks, questioned farmers, checked every barn and shed within miles. But the night had swallowed Ethan whole, leaving only tire tracks and a single sneaker print in the mud. Patty and Mark barely slept, their eyes red-rimmed as they taped posters to telephone poles missing Ethan Callahan, 11 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. Patty's hands shook as she smoothed the edges of each poster, whispering to herself, "You're out there, Ethan. You have to be." Mark stayed quiet, his silence a wall against the terror eating at him. He'd taught Ethan to fish, to throw a football, to be brave. Now he wondered if that bravery had cost his son everything. Days bled into weeks. The town rallied, organizing candlelight vigils, their flames flickering against the autumn chill. Strangers drove from miles away to join the search, their boots muddy, their hearts heavy. But with each passing hour, hope dimmed. Patty sat by the phone, jumping at every ring, praying for a miracle. Noah and Cody carried their guilt like stones, replaying that night, wondering if they could have done more. The community whispered in grocery stores and church pews, their voices hushed with fear and suspicion. Who could do this? Who was hiding in their midst? Patty clung to one thought: Ethan was alive. He had to be. She saw him in her dreams, his crooked smile, his voice calling her name. She didn't know that somewhere in a cold, dark place, Ethan was fighting to hold on to the same hope, his quick mind already searching for a way to survive. January 13th, 1989. 9 months before Ethan's disappearance. 12-year-old Alex Sherrill lived a happy life with his family in the small town of Cold Spring, Minnesota, just 10 miles from the Callahans. Alex, just 12 years old, had been walking home from the rink, his skates slung over his shoulder, the taste of a chocolate malt still lingering on his tongue. He'd waved goodbye to his buddy Corey, ignoring the nagging urge to ask for a walk home. The alley behind the cafe was a shortcut, quiet and familiar, but that night it felt different too. Still, like the air itself was holding its breath. A car had pulled up slow and deliberate, its headlights cutting through the dark. "Hey, kid," the driver called, leaning out, his face shadowed. "You know the way to the highway?" Alex, always eager to help, stepped closer, pointing down the road. "It's that way about a mile." Before he could back away, the man was out of the car, moving faster than Alex could process. A hand clamped over his arm, hard enough to bruise, and the cold steel of a gun pressed against his side. "Get in," the man growled, "or you're done." Alex's heart pounded, his legs trembling as he was shoved into the back seat, the door slamming shut like a coffin lid. The man drove the car, rattling over gravel roads, a police scanner crackling with static on the dash. Alex's mind raced, memorizing every turn, every sound, the hum of the engine, the crunch of tires, the man's heavy breathing. He didn't know where they were going, only that he had to stay sharp, had to find a way out. When the car stopped deep in the countryside, Alex's fear spiked, but so did his resolve. The man ordered him to lie down, to cover his eyes with his hat, but Alex kept his wits about him. He noticed a loose seatbelt buckle, its metal edge sharp against his fingers. As the man fumbled with something in the front seat, Alex's hands worked quickly, quietly sawing at the rope binding his wrists. His heart thundered, but he forced himself to breathe slow, to stay calm. When the man stepped out to open the trunk, Alex seized his chance, kicking the door open and bolting into the night. He ran, legs burning through a field of frozen grass, the man's curses echoing behind him. "You're dead, kid!" the man shouted, but Alex didn't look back. He dove into a ditch, heart pounding, and waited until the car's engine faded into the distance. Shivering, scraped, and terrified, he stumbled the 2 miles back to Cold Spring, collapsing into his parents' arms. "He's still out there," Alex whispered, his voice shaking as he recounted the ordeal to the police, describing the car, the scanner, the man's gravelly voice. But the threat lingered like a shadow. "If they come close to finding out who I am, I'll find you and kill you." When news of Ethan Callahan's abduction broke just 10 miles away in St. Joseph, Alex's stomach churned. The details were too familiar. The masked man, the gun, the sudden terror. Sitting in his family's living room, the TV blaring a news report about Ethan, Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October cold. "It's him," he told his mom, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's the same guy." The similarities haunted him, kept him up at night, his mind replaying that dark car ride, wondering if Ethan was still out there fighting like he had. The police had a name: Carl Rayner. A local man, a former National Guardsman with a rap sheet, burglaries, a couple of DWIs, and most tellingly, a police scanner in his car, just like Alex described. The deputies brought Alex to the station, their faces grim, as they spread a lineup of photos across the table. Alex's finger hovered over Rayner's picture, his heart racing. The eyes, the jawline. It felt right, but the fear of being wrong gnawed at him. "It might be him," he said, his voice small, "but I can't swear to it." The cops exchanged glances, their frustration palpable. They'd found fibers on Alex's snowsuit that matched Rayner's car, a blue sedan with worn upholstery, but without a confession or a clear ID, it wasn't enough. Rayner walked free, his smirk burning into Alex's memory as he left the station. For Patty Callahan, the lack of answers was a wound that wouldn't close. She sat in her kitchen surrounded by stacks of flyers, Ethan's face smiling up at her from every one. Missing Ethan Callahan, 11 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. She traced his picture with her finger, her chest tight with a mix of hope and dread. Every morning she woke expecting to hear his footsteps, his laugh, but the house was too quiet. The silence, a weight that pressed harder each day. She and Mark took to the airwaves pleading on local news, their voices steady, but their eyes betraying their fear. "If you know anything, please come forward," Patty said into the camera, her hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. "We just want our boy back." Mark was quieter, his grief a private storm. He'd sit on the porch at night, staring at the stars, replaying that phone call from Noah the moment their world cracked open. Somebody took Ethan. Noah had said, his voice breaking. Mark had taught his boys to be tough to stand up for themselves, but now he wondered if Ethan's courage, his quick thinking to save his brother and friend, had sealed his fate. The guilt was a knot in his gut tightening every time he saw Noah's haunted eyes or heard Cody's whispered apologies for running. In St. Joseph, fear spread like wildfire. Parents kept their kids indoors, their bikes gathering dust in garages. The community, once a place where neighbors left doors unlocked, now locked eyes with suspicion. At the grocery store, whispers followed every stranger, every unfamiliar car. Who could do this? People asked, their voices low, as if speaking too loudly might summon the monster among them. Church services grew somber, filled with prayers for Ethan, for safety, for answers. Candlelight vigils lit up the town square, the flames trembling in the wind, each one a fragile hope that refused to die. Alex, too, carried a weight no 12-year-old should bear. In Cold Spring, rumors swirled about the boy who'd escaped a kidnapper, and though the police tried to keep his name quiet, kids at school stared, their whispers cutting deeper than any knife. "Is that him?" They'd murmur, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Alex's nightmares were relentless dark roads, the hum of a car engine, that voice promising death. His parents, desperate to protect him, packed up and moved to Painesville, a small town 20 miles away, hoping for a fresh start. But even there, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the dread that the man was still out there waiting. Sleep came in fits, his bedroom floor, a safer haven than his bed, where shadows seemed to move in the dark. "Somebody's got to know something, and I'm not stopping till I find it." Joy. Baker muttered, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, the glow of her laptop casting shadows across her cluttered Painesville kitchen. It was 2013, and the quiet Minnesota town of Painesville, with its tidy lawns and church suppers, held secrets that had festered for decades. Joy, a blogger with a knack for digging into local mysteries, had stumbled across an old newspaper clipping about Ethan Callahan's disappearance, a case that had haunted the region since 1989. The grainy photo of Ethan, blonde hair, crooked smile, stirred something in her, a mix of curiosity and outrage. How could a boy vanish without a trace? And why had the trail gone so cold? Her late-night searches led her to a string of unsettling reports from the mid-1980s accounts of young boys in Painesville who'd been followed, grabbed, and terrorized by a man who melted into the night. The details: dark clothing, sudden attacks, a voice that chilled, felt too close to Ethan's case to be coincidence. Cody's heart sank as he read about other kids' fear, his own memories raw. They'd found a pattern, and they were determined to unravel it. Joy's home had become a war room, the dining table buried under stacks of articles, police reports, and maps marked with red pins. Painesville, just 20 miles from St. Joseph, had been a quiet backdrop to her life, a place where she'd raised her kids and baked pies for the county fair. Cody's escape had been a miracle, but it left Noah grappling with guilt, wondering if he could have done more for Ethan. Now it felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, each one tied to a child's fear, a family's grief. Noah's stories shared with Cody fueled their resolve to keep searching to honor the boy who'd saved them. For Alex Foster, now in his late 30s, sat in his Painesville living room, the phone pressed to his ear, Joy's voice crackling through the line. "Alex, I found something," she said, her words tumbling out fast. "There were other kids right here in Painesville back in the 80s. Same kind of attacks, quick, scary. Noah's escape was so similar. Cody thinks it's connected, too." Alex's breath caught his hand tightening around the phone. For 24 years, he'd carried the weight of that January night in 1989 when he'd been 12 and a man with a gun had yanked him off a sidewalk. Cody's story. Noah's, too, echoed his own terror. They'd all escaped, but Ethan hadn't. "You're saying there were others?" Alex asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the worn carpet. Joy's voice softened, but her urgency didn't waver. "I've got names, dates, reports." Noah and Cody weren't alone either. "Alex, we need to talk." They met at Alex's house, papers spread out like a map of pain. Alex's hands shook as he read the old articles, each one detailing a boy's encounter with a stranger in Painesville, 1986, 1987, 1988. The descriptions were eerily familiar, a man in dark clothes striking fast, vanishing before help could come. Cody said the same. Alex whispered, his voice thick. Noah, too. Joy reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "We're with you, Cody. Noah, too. We're gonna figure this out." Alex nodded, feeling a connection he hadn't expected, a shared mission that made Alex's work feel a little less lonely. Their partnership grew over weeks, fueled by late-night calls and trips to the library. Alex and Cody shared details. Noah's memories, sharp, their stories, a guide. Joy took notes, cross-referencing their accounts with the Painesville cases, building a timeline that pointed to one chilling truth: the same predator had been hunting. St. Joseph Patty Callahan stood in the community center, her voice steady. "We can't give up on Ethan," she said, holding up a flyer with his picture. "He's out there." The room was packed. Neighbors Cody and Noah among them, their faces etched with sorrow and resolve. Patty's dreams were vivid, Ethan's voice calling her name, his face so real she'd wake with tears. The breakthrough came in 2015, when Joy, Cody, and Noah's work caught the sheriff's office's attention. Alex's clothing, preserved in an evidence locker, was tested, its DNA matching Carl Rayner's. The results were a shock, confirming Rayner's role in Alex's case. Cody's heart raced, Noah's too, knowing they'd helped expose the truth. Rayner was arrested that July for child pornography found in his home, a discovery that shifted everything. Joy and Alex stood outside the station together. "We're close," Joy said, her voice firm. Patty sat by her kitchen window watching snow dust the fields. The phone rang. "We've got a lead," the detective said. "Rayner." She closed her eyes, a prayer forming Cody's courage. Noah's, too, fueling her hope. Alex, Cody, and Noah stood together, their resolve unbroken, knowing Rayner's silence was a wall they had to break. In St. Joseph's hope was a beacon, a light for Ethan still fighting somewhere to survive. "We found something, Patty. You need to brace yourself." The detective's voice trembled through the phone, a crack in his usual steady tone that sent a chill down Patty Callahan's spine. It was July 2016, and the summer heat hung heavy over Painesville, Minnesota, where the air was thick with dust and the weight of secrets. The investigation into Carl Rayner, the man whose name had haunted the Callahan family for nearly 3 decades, had taken a turn no one expected. The Stearns County Sheriff's Office, spurred by Joy Baker and Alex Foster's relentless digging, had secured a warrant to search Rayner's ramshackle house again, this time with a focus that bordered on desperation. The child pornography charges had kept Rayner behind bars, but the question of Ethan alive or gone still burned a wound that refused to heal. The deputies, armed with flashlights and crowbars, had torn through the house, their boots echoing on creaky floors, until one of them noticed a loose panel in the basement wall, a seam too deliberate to be accidental. The panel gave way to a hidden door, rusted and bolted its lock, heavy with years of disuse. The air that rushed out was dank sour with mold and something darker, something that made the deputies pause, their breath catching. Beyond the door, a narrow staircase descended into a cellar, a place so cloaked in darkness it seemed to swallow the light. The walls were damp, streaked with grime, and the floor was littered with debris. Broken crates, a stained mattress, a single tin cup. Chains, rusted but intact, hung from a beam, their purpose unmistakable. The sight hit the deputies like a punch, their radios crackling as they called for backup. Their voices tight with the realization that this was no ordinary basement. This was a prison, and someone had been kept here maybe for years. The search team moved with grim efficiency, their flashlights sweeping the shadows, each step a prayer that they weren't too late. At the far end of the cellar, behind a stack of moldy boxes, they found him a man, gaunt and disheveled, his hair a wild gray tangle, his clothes little more than rags. He flinched at the light. His hands raised, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Who's there?" He rasped, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper, as if speaking had become foreign to him. The lead deputy, a man who'd seen too much in his career, froze his beam, catching the man's face, hollow cheeks, a crooked nose, eyes that held a flicker of something familiar. "Ethan?" He said the name, slipping out before he could stop it. The man blinked his head, tilting as if the name were a key to a lock long rusted shut. "It's me," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm Ethan Callahan." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy, a truth that had been hidden for 27 years. The deputies moved closer, their hands steady but gentle, guiding him to his feet. He was trembling, his body frail from years of malnourishment, his skin pale as moonlight. The cellar's stench clung to him, a reminder of the life in darkness, but his eyes, though haunted, held a spark that hadn't been extinguished. Ethan was alive, a man of 37 emerging from a nightmare that had begun when he was just a boy. Ethan's story came in whispers, halting and raw as he sat in a hospital room, an IV dripping into his arm, the sterile light harsh against his pallor. The detectives listened, their notepads open, their hearts heavy, as he described the days that turned into years in that cellar. Rayner had dragged him there after the night on the road, when Ethan's quick thinking had saved Noah and Cody. The first days were a blur of fear, the chains biting into his wrists, the darkness so complete he couldn't tell day from night. Rayner had kept him hidden, bringing scraps of food, moldy bread, watery soup, barely enough to sustain him. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the creak of the door above the sound of Rayner's boots, the occasional muttered threat to keep him quiet. Ethan had fought to hold on to himself, to the memories of his family, his laugh, the warmth of Sunday football games, the way his mom would ruffle his hair. He'd clung to those images, using them to build a mental escape when the walls closed in a way to keep his spirit alive. He'd counted days at first, scratching marks on the wall with a broken spoon, but time blurred the marks, becoming a ritual more than a measure. The loneliness was worse than the hunger, a void that threatened to swallow him. But he'd talked to himself through it, whispering stories he'd read, singing snippets of songs. He could barely remember anything to keep the despair at bay. "You're still here, Ethan," he'd tell himself, his voice echoing in the dark. "You're gonna get out." Hope had flickered, dimmed, but never died. He'd heard faint sounds from above, radio's voices, the hum of life, and he'd imagined his family searching, his mom's voice calling his name. Some days he'd believed he'd die in that cellar, his body giving out before his will, but he'd fought to stay alive, to see the sky again, to feel the sun. The years had stretched his body, aging, his hair graying, but his mind remained sharp, always searching for a way out even as the chains held him fast. In St. Joseph, the news hit like a thunderclap. Patty Callahan was in her kitchen folding laundry when the phone rang. "Patty, it's him," the detective said, his voice thick with emotion. "We found Ethan. He's alive." The phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor as her knees buckled. Mark caught her, his own eyes wet, and they clung to each other, tears mixing with laughter, disbelief giving way to a joy so fierce it hurt. "He's coming home," Patty whispered, her voice breaking, as if saying it aloud would make it real. The reunion was a scene of raw emotion played out in a hospital hallway under fluorescent lights. Ethan, frail and unsteady, stepped from the elevator, flanked by deputies, his eyes scanning the crowd. Patty saw him first, her breath catching as she recognized the boy and the man, the tilt of his head, the shape of his eyes. "Ethan," she cried, rushing forward, her arms wrapping around him, her sobs muffled against his shoulder. Mark was next, his strong arms enveloping them both, his voice a choked, "My boy." Noah and Cody, now grown, stood frozen for a moment, their faces a mix of shock and relief, before they joined the embrace. Noah's hand gripping Ethan's, Cody's voice breaking as he said, "You made it, man." The room was a blur of tears and laughter, nurses wiping their eyes, deputies standing back to give the family space. Patty knelt before Ethan, her hands framing his face as if to memorize him anew. "Thank you, God," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Ethan's eyes were wet, his expression a tangle of relief and confusion, as if the world above ground was a puzzle he hadn't yet solved. He was home, but the boy who'd left on a bike 27 years ago was gone, replaced by a man shaped by darkness, his heart carrying wounds that time might never heal. The community of St. Joseph rallied, their joy tempered by the horror of what Ethan had endured. Church bells rang, neighbors gathered, their faces lit with a hope they'd nearly lost. Vigils turned to celebrations, candles replaced by balloons, but beneath the surface, a quiet sorrow lingered. Parents held their children tighter, knowing the monster had lived among them, his house a stone's throw from their own. The seller's discovery was a wound, a reminder of the evil that had hidden in plain sight. But it also sparked a resolve to heal, to protect, to never let such darkness take root again. Ethan's return was a miracle, but his journey was far from over. The hospital room, with its beeping monitors and starched sheets, was a stark contrast to the cellar, but it felt alien, overwhelming. He flinched at loud noises, his hands trembling when a nurse approached too quickly. The world had moved on. Cars were sleeker, phones were computers. His siblings were adults with lives of their own, but Ethan was caught in a limbo, his mind still tethered to the dark. He spoke little, his words careful, as if testing the ground beneath him. "I kept thinking of you," he told Patty one night, his voice soft, his eyes distant. "It's what kept me going." Patty and Mark vowed to help him rebuild, to fill the years stolen from him with love and patience. Noah and Cody, haunted by their own guilt, became his anchors, sharing stories of the life he'd missed, their laughter, a bridge to the present. The Callahans leaned on their faith, their community, their unbreakable bond, knowing the road ahead would be long, but believing they could walk it together. In Painesville, Joy and Alex watched from afar, their hearts full but heavy. Their work had brought Ethan home, but the cost the years lost, the pain endured, was a truth they carried quietly. St. Joseph stood stronger, its people bound by a shared triumph over darkness, their hope a light that would guide Ethan and all who loved him toward healing. The summer of 2016 had brought a reckoning to Stearns County, Minnesota, where the air was thick with anticipation and the weight of nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions. The courtroom in St. Cloud was packed, the benches filled with reporters, neighbors, and families whose lives had been touched by the shadow of Ethan Callahan's disappearance. The air felt heavy, charged with a mix of hope and dread, as all eyes fixed on Carl Rayner, the man whose name had lingered like a ghost in the minds of investigators and victims alike. His shoulders slumped, his eyes glued to the floor, avoiding the gazes that burned into him. Paddy Callahan's quiet strength, Alex Foster's steely resolve, Joy Baker's unyielding determination. The charges were severe: kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and a litany of others tied to the child pornography found in his home. But it was the truth about Ethan, the boy stolen from a quiet road in 1989, that held the room in a vice grip. The trial unfolded slowly each day, a test of endurance for those who'd waited 27 years for this moment. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, detailing Rayner's pattern of predation, the Painesville attacks, Alex's escape, and the hidden cellar where Ethan had been held. Evidence was presented: DNA matches, fibers from Alex's snowsuit, the rusted chains in the basement, each piece a nail in the coffin of Rayner's freedom. The bailiff handed out tissues as witnesses took the stand, their voices trembling with the weight of memory. Alex, now a grown man, spoke of that cold January night. His words steady, but his hands clenched as he described the terror of being yanked into a car, the police scanner's crackle, and his desperate run through the fields. "I knew it was him," he said, his eyes locking on Rayner. "I always knew." Paddy sat in the front row, her hands clasped tight, Mark beside her, his jaw set like stone. She listened as the prosecutor described the cellar, the damp walls, the mattress where her son had lived in darkness. Her heart ached, imagining Ethan's courage, his fight to hold on through years of isolation. She wanted to scream, to demand why, but she held herself still, her faith and love for Ethan anchoring her through the storm. The community watched, their breath held, as the bailiff called for order, the judge's gavel a stark reminder that this was real, that justice was finally within reach. When the verdict came, the courtroom erupted. 104 years, the judge declared, his voice firm, unyielding. "Daniel James Rayner, you will spend the rest of your life in prison for the crimes you've committed." Applause broke out, a wave of relief and vindication mingled with sobs from those who'd carried the pain for so long. Paddy's eyes filled her hand, finding marks as they watched Rayner being led away. His wrists cuffed, his face blank. The monster who'd haunted their lives was gone, locked behind bars, but the victory was bittersweet. Ethan was home, but the boy they'd known was forever changed, his spirit carrying scars that no sentence could erase. Ethan sat in a quiet corner of the hospital, a thin blanket draped over his shoulders, his eyes tracing the patterns on the linoleum floor. At 37, he was a stranger to himself, his reflection in the window showing a man with graying hair and hollow cheeks, not the boy who'd loved fishing and Vikings games. The world outside was overwhelming. Cars honked, phones buzzed. People moved too fast. He flinched at sudden noises, his hands trembling when a nurse approached with a tray of food. The hospital room was a far cry from the cellar, but it felt like another kind of cage, the sterile walls closing in as he tried to make sense of his freedom. Paddy and Mark were there every day, their presence a lifeline. Paddy would sit beside him, her hand resting lightly on his, telling stories of the family of Noah and Cody, of the life that had waited for him. "We never stopped looking," she'd say, her voice soft but fierce. "We knew you were out there." Ethan would nod, his throat tight, struggling to find words for the gratitude and guilt that swirled inside him. He'd kept their faces in his mind through the darkest years, their laughter a shield against despair. But now, face to face, he felt like an outsider, a man who'd missed too much to ever catch up. Noah and Cody, now with families of their own, took turns visiting, their eyes bright with relief, but shadowed with the guilt they'd carried since that night on the road. "You saved us," Noah said one afternoon, his voice breaking as he gripped Ethan's hand. "You told us to run, and we did. I'm so sorry we couldn't save you." Ethan shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "You got home. That's what mattered." Their bond forged in that moment of terror held strong, but Ethan's silences spoke louder than his words, a reminder of the years stolen from them all. The psychological toll was a mountain Ethan climbed daily. Nightmares woke him, the creak of the cellar door blending with the hospital's hum, pulling him back to that dark place. He'd stare out the window, watching clouds drift, trying to remember what freedom felt like. Therapists came, their voices gentle, but Ethan struggled to open up his thoughts. Tangled in memories of hunger, cold likely to remain silent. His story, a testament to the strength that had kept him alive, a reminder that even in the darkest places, the human spirit could endure. Hey guys, thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this video. Writing Ethan's story has been an emotional journey, one that left me deeply moved and honestly, a little shaken. This isn't just a thriller or a suspenseful drama, it's a powerful reminder of the darkest corners of human nature and the resilience of the human spirit. What struck me most was Ethan's incredible strength, his courage to protect his brother, his unwavering hope during those years of captivity, and his struggle to find his place in a world that had moved on without him. His story shows us how a single act of bravery, like telling his brother and friend to run, can mean the difference between life and death. But beyond that, Ethan's journey is a lesson for all of us. Never underestimate the monsters that might be hiding in plain sight. It's a wake-up call that even the quietest town can harbor unimaginable evil. As parents, we have a responsibility to protect our kids, to talk to them, to teach them how to stay safe, and to never take their safety for granted. This story is a testament to the strength of family and community, the bonds that can endure even in the darkest times. But it's also a warning, a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary doors. So what do you think? Did Ethan's story leave you thinking about your own family, your own neighborhood? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Let's keep this conversation going, because stories like this one can truly change the way we see the world, and maybe, just maybe, help us keep our kids safe.